Security guards were dragging the fan off stage when Michael Jackson's reaction shocked everyone in that packed arena. But what happened next would become one of the most beautiful moments in music history, a moment that revealed the true heart of the king of pop. It was July 16, 1988, at Wembley Stadium in London. The Bad World Tour was in full swing, and Michael Jackson was at the absolute peak of his powers. 80,000 fans had packed into the legendary venue, their voices creating a wall of sound that could be heard miles away. The energy was electric, the anticipation palpable. This wasn't just a concert, it was a pilgrimage for fans who had traveled from every corner of Europe to witness greatness. Among those 80,000 souls was 17-year-old Sarah Mitchell, a girl from Manchester who had saved every penny from her part-time job at a local bookstore to buy a ticket. But Sarah wasn't like the other fans. 3 months earlier, she had received news that would change her life forever. She had been diagnosed with leukemia. The doctors gave her treatments, hope, and a fighting chance, but they couldn't give her what she wanted most, the promise that she would live to see her 18th birthday. When Sarah's mother suggested they use the money she'd saved for college to see Michael Jackson, Sarah initially refused. But as the treatments grew harder and the uncertainty grew larger, she realized that some dreams can't wait for tomorrow. This concert might be her only chance to see her idol, the man whose music had carried her through the darkest nights of her illness. The show began with the thunderous opening of "Wanna Be Startin' Somethin'." Michael emerged from beneath the stage in a cloud of smoke and silver light, his sequined glove catching every spotlight as 80,000 people erupted in unified ecstasy. For the next hour, he transported them to another dimension, where pain didn't exist, where dreams came true, and where the impossible became possible. Subscribe now and leave a comment, because the most incredible part of this story is about to unfold. Sarah was seated in section 12, row F, not the closest to the stage, but close enough to see the details in Michael's expressions, close enough to feel the energy radiating from the man who had become her beacon of hope. As the concert progressed through hit after hit, something began to stir within her. The medications made her weak, the treatments made her nauseous, but Michael's music made her feel alive in a way she hadn't felt in months. During Human Nature, something extraordinary happened. Michael was moving across the stage, his voice floating over the crowd like silk, when his eyes seemed to find Sarah in the darkness. It might have been coincidence, it might have been the way the stage lights hit her section, but for a moment, Sarah felt like he was singing directly to her. The connection was so powerful, so undeniable, that without thinking, without planning, she began to move. Security at Wembley was notoriously tight. The barriers were high, the guards were experienced, and fans who tried to rush the stage were typically stopped before they made it 3 steps. But desperation can fuel extraordinary strength. Sarah vaulted over the barrier with surprising agility, her thin frame moving through the crowd of security guards like water through stones. Before anyone could react, she was climbing onto the stage. The music continued, but something shifted in the atmosphere. The crowd's cheers became more focused, more intense. They could see something happening on stage, something unscripted and real. Michael was still singing, still performing, but his eyes had found Sarah, who was now standing at the edge of the stage, tears streaming down her face. But here's where this story takes an incredible turn. The part nobody expected. 3 security guards converged on Sarah simultaneously. These were professionals, trained to handle exactly this situation with swift efficiency. The first guard reached her within seconds, his hands already moving to escort her off stage. The second and third flanked her, forming a human wall between Sarah and Michael. To them, she was just another overzealous fan who needed to be removed before she disrupted the show. But Michael saw something different. In that split second, as the guards began to physically guide Sarah toward the stage exit, Michael Jackson did something that would define not just this moment, but his entire legacy as a human being. He stopped singing. Mid-verse, mid-note, mid-breath, he simply stopped. 80,000 people fell into absolute silence. The band, confused, began to slow their playing. The security guards froze, uncertain whether to continue with the removal or wait for direction. In that suspended moment, Michael Jackson walked directly toward Sarah and the security team. "Wait," he said, his voice carrying across the stunned arena through his wireless microphone. "Please, just wait." The head of security approached Michael, speaking urgently into his ear. Protocol demanded that unauthorized individuals be removed immediately. The liability issues alone were staggering. But Michael raised his hand, a gentle but unmistakably authoritative gesture that stopped the conversation. He approached Sarah, who was now shaking, whether from fear, excitement, or the effects of her treatment, nobody could tell. Michael's expression wasn't one of annoyance or concern for his security. It was pure compassion, the look of someone who recognized pain and wanted to heal it. "What's your name?" he asked softly, his microphone catching every word and broadcasting it to the mesmerized audience. "Sarah," she managed through her tears. "Sarah Mitchell." Michael nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. "Sarah, are you okay? Are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to speak. The security guard stood by, still ready to escort her away, but Michael's body language made it clear that wasn't going to happen. What Michael did next sent waves of emotion through the stadium that are still talked about today. He removed his iconic fedora, the same hat he'd worn throughout the entire Bad tour, the hat that had become synonymous with his image, and placed it gently on Sarah's head. The crowd erupted, but not in cheers. In tears. 80,000 people, many of them hardened Londoners who prided themselves on keeping their emotions in check, began to cry openly. The hat wasn't just a piece of clothing, it was a symbol, a piece of Michael Jackson's soul being shared with someone who needed it more than he did. But Michael wasn't finished. He took Sarah's hand and led her to center stage, where his wireless microphone was waiting on its stand. The band, following his unspoken cues, began to play the gentle opening chords of "She's Out of My Life," one of Michael's most emotional ballads. This song, Michael announced to the crowd, is for Sarah, and for everyone who's fighting their own battles. As Michael began to sing, something magical happened. Sarah, still wearing his fedora, still holding his hand, began to mouth the words along with him. The cameras caught her transformation, from a sick, frightened girl to someone who, for these few minutes, felt like she could conquer the world. The song became a duet in the most beautiful way possible. Michael's professional, polished voice intertwined with Sarah's whispered words, creating a harmony that was both musically imperfect and emotionally flawless. The 80,000 people in Wembley Stadium became a choir, their voices joining the unlikely duo on stage. Share this story and subscribe, because what happened next will make this moment unforgettable. When the song ended, Michael didn't immediately return to his concert routine. Instead, he spent several more minutes with Sarah, asking about her life, her dreams, her fears. The entire stadium waited patiently, understanding that they were witnessing something more important than any choreographed performance. Sarah told Michael about her illness, about her treatments, about her fear that she might not live to see her favorite singer perform. Michael listened with the intensity of someone who understood that sometimes, being heard is more healing than any medicine. Before he let her go, Michael did something that would change Sarah's life forever. He removed one of his custom-made gloves, not the famous sequined one, but a simple black leather glove he wore on his right hand, and gave it to her. "This is for strength," he told her, his words carrying across the stadium. "Every time you feel scared, every time you feel alone, remember that you have 80,000 friends here tonight, and you have me." The security guards, who had been ready to remove Sarah forcibly just minutes earlier, now formed a protective escort as they helped her safely back to her seat. But the energy in the stadium had fundamentally changed. This wasn't just entertainment anymore, it was community, it was healing, it was love in its purest form. Michael returned to his performance, but something had shifted in his demeanor as well. His movements were more deliberate, his voice more emotional, his connection with the audience deeper than it had been before. The remaining songs of the concert took on new meaning, each lyric carrying the weight of the moment they had all shared. Years later, Sarah Mitchell would beat her leukemia. She would go on to become a pediatric nurse, dedicating her life to caring for children facing their own battles with serious illnesses. In her office, she keeps two treasures, Michael Jackson's fedora and his black leather glove, both carefully preserved in a display case with a simple plaque that reads, "Some moments change everything." But the impact of that night went far beyond one girl's healing journey. Videos of the encounter, grainy and bootlegged, circulated among fans for decades before the internet made them widely available. The footage showed the world a different side of Michael Jackson, not the perfectionist performer, not the controversial figure, but the human being who understood that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stop everything and really see another person's pain. Michael himself was changed by the encounter. In interviews after the Bad tour, he frequently spoke about that night at Wembley, about how Sarah's courage reminded him why he performed in the first place. "Music isn't just about entertainment," he said in a 1989 interview. "It's about connection. It's about healing. Sarah taught me that night that sometimes the performance has to stop so the person can be seen." The fedora became a symbol in Michael Jackson's performances from that night forward. He would often remove it during concerts and hold it toward the audience, a silent reminder that connection was always possible, that every person in the crowd mattered, that love could triumph over protocol. Sarah kept in touch with Michael's team over the years, sending updates about her health, her recovery, and eventually, her career in nursing. When Michael passed away in 2009, she was among the thousands who gathered outside Neverland Ranch to pay their respects. She brought with her a letter, written in the same shaky handwriting she'd had as a 17-year-old patient, thanking him for showing her that even in the darkest moments, there was still light to be found. The security guards who were ready to remove Sarah that night later admitted they had learned something profound about their job. "We were so focused on protecting Michael from the crowd," one of them reflected years later, "that we almost prevented him from doing what he did best, connecting with people who needed him most." The true legacy of that July night in 1988 isn't found in the bootleg videos or the newspaper articles that covered the unusual interruption to Michael Jackson's concert. It's found in the thousands of messages Sarah has received over the years from people who heard her story and felt inspired to face their own challenges with greater courage. It's found in the nurses and doctors who chose their professions after seeing how powerful it can be when someone simply stops and pays attention to another person's pain. Most importantly, it's found in the understanding that true artistry isn't just about technical perfection or commercial success. Sometimes, the most beautiful performance happens when the music stops and the human heart takes center stage. Michael Jackson understood this intuitively, and on that night in London, he showed 80,000 people that the greatest show of strength isn't in sticking to the script, it's in having the courage to break it when love calls you to something greater. The ripple effects of that night continued for decades. Sarah's story became legendary among Michael Jackson fans, shared in online forums and fan gatherings around the world. But perhaps more importantly, it inspired countless others to show kindness in their own lives. Concert venues began training their security staff differently, emphasizing the importance of recognizing when rules needed to bend for human compassion. Michael himself carried the lesson forward in every subsequent performance. During the Dangerous World Tour, he established what became known as Sarah's Moments, planned breaks in his concerts where he would invite audience members with special needs or difficult circumstances to join him on stage. But these planned interactions, beautiful as they were, never quite captured the raw spontaneity and authentic emotion of that night at Wembley. The black glove that Michael gave Sarah became more than just a keepsake. Sarah would often bring it with her during her most difficult chemotherapy sessions, holding it tight when the treatments became overwhelming. She said later that it reminded her not just of Michael's kindness, but of her own strength, the strength it had taken to climb onto that stage, to ask for what she needed, to fight for her life. In 2008, just months before Michael's passing, Sarah finally had the chance to meet him again. She was working as a pediatric nurse at Great Ormond Street Hospital in London when Michael visited the children's cancer ward. She was 37 years old then, healthy and vibrant, wearing scrubs instead of concert clothes. When she approached him, still wearing the hospital ID badge that identified her as Nurse Mitchell, Michael's eyes lit up with recognition. Sarah, he said immediately, his voice carrying the same warmth it had 20 years earlier. You kept the promise. They spent an hour together that day, walking through the hospital ward, visiting with children who were fighting battles similar to the one Sarah had won. Michael watched her work with the same gentle authority he'd shown that night at Wembley, and Sarah could see in his eyes that he understood the circle that had been completed. Before he left that day, Michael made a donation to the hospital that would fund an entire wing dedicated to adolescent cancer patients. But more than the money, he left something else, a small plaque in the children's playroom that read, "Sometimes the music stops so the heart can be heard. In memory of a night when everything changed." Subscribe to this channel, share this story, and remember that in a world that often feels divided and disconnected, moments like these remind us that compassion can still stop the show, still change lives, and still prove that music truly is the universal language of love.